We already have two indications of a firewall being present. The first was our Nmap scan on port 80 that returned the port to be closed. And then the second, after we restarted the SSH service and we did an Nmap scan, we got the result saying that the port was filtered. Two very good indications that there might be a firewall blocking our connectivity to these two ports in specific. So now I'm going to go back to my target machine and I'm going to try and investigate this a little bit more and figure out whether there actually is a firewall trying to block access to any particular ports or services. And the command to do that is ufw and status. That will show me the status of the firewall on the target machine. And as we expected, indeed the firewall is actually active and is blocking access to certain ports. We can see here that it's blocking access to port 22. Now, this is where the perspective of the bad guy kicks in. Let me be very clear about this. As a penetration tester, as an ethical hacker, if you're doing a job for a client and you manage to break into a system, the last thing that you want to do is to change any configuration on the system unless you have their explicit permission and they are very clear about the fact that you can do that. 99.9% of the time, this isn't something that you're allowed to do or should be doing. So the previous video when I changed the configuration file, this is something that you definitely should not be doing in an ethical hacking engagement. However, because I promised you in this section that I'm going to be showing you the perspective of the bad guy, we're going to be putting on our black hats and we're going to be pretending that we're bad guys. We're no longer ethical hackers. So we changed the configuration file and we're going to be changing the firewall settings right now. Because a bad guy couldn't care any less about whether they're going to be doing any damage to your production system or to your network. They care about what they want. And what they want right now is to get their hands on the financial information by any means possible. And if that means that they're going to be shutting down your firewall and exposing your systems to more risk, then that's what they're going to do. They're not going to care. So let me be very clear about this. What I'm about to do now, I would never ever do in a professional engagement. This is just to show you the perspective of the bad guy. Let's proceed. I'm going to go ahead and change the configuration of the firewall to allow SSH. And now if I look at the status of the firewall again, I can see that SSH is now being allowed. So if I go back to my Kali machine and I rerun the Nmap scan, as you would expect, SSH port is now reported to be open. So now I can use the SSH command to try and log into the remote machine using the root user. And that will give me a fully interactive shell within a terminal. As if I'm sitting on my Kali machine, I'll be sitting on the target machine. And to do that, I'll use the SSH root at the IP address. However, of course, for that to work, I need a correct password. But I already have access to the root user. So all I need to do now is reset or change the password for the root user. Again, this is something that I would never ever do in a professional engagement. This is just the perspective of the bad guy. A bad guy wouldn't care less. So I'll go ahead and change the password for the root user. If you're following along and doing the exercise yourself, just set it to whatever you want. I'll hit enter. I'll accept the key. I'll punch in the password. And here we go. I'm logged in. Now if I try to nano the SSHD config, I'm able to change it in whichever way I want, meaning now that I have a fully interactive shell in a terminal. So right now, I have access to this machine in 3 different ways. I have the initial reverse shell that I got in Metasploit. On top of that, I have another shell that I got using the Python reverse shell. And now I have access using SSH. So I managed to access this machine using 3 different shells consecutively at the same time. So if for whatever reason the connection with Metasploit terminates, I still have 2 shells. If the reverse shell for whatever reason drops or terminates, I still have access through SSH. So I can log back into the system whenever I want without having to re-exploit it. And this is one of the post-exploitation activities that we talked about. Getting access to SSH so you do not have to exploit the system over and over again. So keep that in mind. This is now the first way that as a bad guy, I managed to backdoor the system and get access without having to exploit it using SSH. Alright, having done all that, let's not forget that our mission is still to find the credit card database and get access to it. So let's keep going.